The Dr. Taz Show, the podcast. Dr. Taz, Superwoman Wellness. Here's Dr. Taz.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of Superwoman Wellness, where you know that I'm determined to bring you back to your superpowered self. Joining me today is a special guest. Dr. Diva Nagula is a board-certified osteopathic physician and has extensive knowledge and training in integrative and functional medicine. Dr. Nagula is a Washington, D.C. native and grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. His interest in medicine developed at an early age when he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and practice medicine. He has had a very interesting career. He spent some time in Georgia, but after several years, and I want him to tell the story, so I'm not going to give too much away, but after several years of fighting cancer, he remains in complete remission. At the time of his diagnosis, he developed an interest in integrative and functional medicine and an approach to treating the whole patient. He realized his poor lifestyle choices, extreme stress, lack of sleep, infrequent exercise, and the standard American processed diet contributed to his diagnoses. So Dr. Nagula, welcome to the show. You have written a book, I believe, From Doctor to Patient, Beating Cancer Through Mind, Body, and Spirit. You sound like you have an amazing story of healing. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to be a doctor diagnosed with cancer and how it redirected your course.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show today. Essentially, my story started in 2014. And what had happened was prior to that, I had been practicing in interventional pain management. And I had started my own practice, and I went through the entire process of entrepreneurship, not knowing what I was doing because they don't teach you business in medical school.
No, they don't.
And I built the medical practice up, and I actually worked really hard, and I got burnt out. I built up 2 offices in 2 different states and a surgery center, and I had 25 employees. I just was really burnt out and decided to exit. About a year later, and I went to the doctor's office, and this whole year I wasn't working. After my exit. And I figured, I just gotten married. I was ready to turn a new chapter in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling great, no stress. And then I went to the doctor's office for a routine visit. And at this visit, the complaint that I had to my physician was that, what are these like cysts that are on my neck? And there were like 2 of them. In the last month or so, it was actually growing. And they were palpable, they were noticeable if you were able to look in the mirror. And he told me, he says, I don't think there's cysts. I think your lymph nodes are enlarged. Let's go ahead and get some scans done and see what happens. I went to the scans. I got some PET scans, the CAT scans done, and it turned out that my lymph nodes were enlarged everywhere. And typically, lymph nodes are 1 to 2 millimeters in size. My lymph nodes at the time were 1 to 2 centimeters in size. So at that point, he had a look on his face that he was concerned. But he said that there's multiple reasons why you're going to have enlarged lymph nodes. But he says, let's go to an oncologist to get the workup done.
Okay.
The word oncologist didn't sound really good, but I understand
Right.
that was the next thing to do. After a battery of tests and after a lymph node biopsy and a bone marrow biopsy, I went back to the physician's office, and he gave me the news that I had stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was it surprising to you as a physician to be given that diagnosis? I mean, how did you wrap your head around that? Because I think, people think, okay, we're doctors, we're going to catch things real quickly on ourselves, but that's not really the way things play out. Like, what was that like to know that you're a physician and that you've had this disease in you probably for some time now? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, when he told me the news, I mean, my wife at the time was bawling. It didn't register for me because it didn't correlate, because I was feeling really well. And I was like, how is this even possible? I'm at the prime of my life. I have no stress at this point. And that's what my thoughts were.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't make any sense. And it wasn't until after I really did a lot of research and really understand what the etiology and the causes were of this cancer, then it dawned on me that it was not just a specific instance. It wasn't a specific month in my life. It was a culmination of things that brew over a long period of time. And it really boiled down to lifestyle strategies that I was espousing.
Wow. So what happens next? You get this diagnosis of stage, and how long ago is that, by the way? Give us a sense.
So I was diagnosed in 2014.
Okay. So
And
almost
yeah,
5 or 6 years ago. So you get
yeah,
diagnosed, and what happens next? Where
yeah.
does your journey take you next?
So at that point, since I was feeling okay, the option for me was to do what was called watch and wait. And
Mm-hmm.
watch and wait is a period of time where you can actually sit and kind of watch to see if the cancer regresses or if it actually advances.
Oh,
And they were actually saying that for me that was an option, but some doctors wanted me to push for aggressive chemo. So I watched and wait for 6 months. I basically, altered my diet. I tried to be really good with my lifestyle at that point. I tried to catch up on sleep and just really be really gentle to my body.
mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it took a turn 6 months later, and I started having this back pain. And the back pain was ready to get into my groin. And as physicians, we know, okay, that's kidney stones, right? And so we got some films, and it turned out that the cancer had actually grown more aggressive. The 1 to 2 centimeters of lymph nodes were no longer distinguishable anymore. They were actually a big mass that got together. All the
Mm.
lymph nodes were just kind of put together in this mass, and it was encroaching on my kidney. And that was what's causing my pain. And so at that point, it was I had to do chemotherapy right away.
Goodness gracious. And so how long was the chemo? Did you have to do chemo and radiation, or was it chemo primarily, or?
So it was chemo and immunotherapy. So it was a day and a half of infusions per month for a total of 6 rounds. So it was 6 months of chemo that I had to go through. And
And
I was
was
going to
it,
say that after 5 months of it, I couldn't bear another month because my immune system was so shot and so compromised from the aggressive chemo immunotherapy that they said I couldn't do a 6. And anything like a cold or a virus could have really tipped the scales for me and put me over the edge and could have killed me.
yeah. So was it successful? Did the
Yeah.
chemo kind of
Yeah. So
take
everything at
care?
that point, yeah, I was put in remission, and they did all the scans and everything was really gone. And so at that point it was, okay, what now? What do I do? And at then it was me discovering how to beat this, and stay in remission and really change my lifestyle, where I would be living a life where it was very preventative and very clean. And I had to research, and that's when I got into integrative medicine. At the time, I applied to Dr. Andy Weil's fellowship at University of Arizona, and
When
I
were
got
you there?
accepted.
Out of curiosity?
I started in 2014.
14. Okay. So
Yeah.
I did mine. I think I was there '06 to '08, but it
Oh
was
wow.
life
Okay.
changing, wasn't it? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
life changing program. At least it
It
was for
sure
me. I
is.
mean, just in terms of thinking about medicine differently, thinking about health differently. How did you now? So had you already started making changes before you did the fellowship, or was the fellowship kind of that kick that was like, okay,
Yeah.
I've got to put the pieces together? I'm curious as to kind of how did that play out for you?
For me, so I was really more concentrated on the diet portion because I thought the diet was really what was the single reason why I got the cancer. Because I was eating crap all my entire life after I left my parents' house from high school. It was processed food after processed food.
Hmm.
And I knew McDonald's wasn't very healthy, but I was like, okay, let's go to Subway. And,
Right.
they have some more vegetables. It was more vegetables than I had put into my body because the only thing I was eating was burgers and that scrap of lettuce and tomato that they gave you. That was my vegetable
Mm-hmm.
content. So I knew I had to change my diet, processed foods and eliminating sugary beverages. And then the big thing was I had to start eating organic. And the main reason was because I had to eliminate glyphosate in my diet. And glyphosate is everywhere.
Right.
And that, for me, when I found out that there was a high correlation between glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, it dawned on me that that was a major culprit in the terms of why I had cancer, why I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Glyphosate, for everybody watching, is one of the major pesticide derivatives. It's in Roundup, and it's probably in our air and water at this point, but it's been linked to a lot of lymphomas, especially non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in particular. Did you live near a farming community or grow up in an area where your exposure to glyphosate may have been higher than somebody else's, or not necessarily?
No, I mean, now I look at it, it could have been that my detox mechanisms, my
Or
internal
impaired?
mechanisms were impaired.
Yeah.
I was living in Florida at the time, and so I was around, year round. I was outside, so and I
Mm-hmm.
played a lot of golf. So the Roundup is obviously used in golf
Right.
courses. So that could have been something there, but I didn't have any quantitative tests at that time, so I didn't know. But I knew that I had to eat better anyway, so might as well switch to organic because the better nutrient content, elimination of any pesticides that could have been compromising my health.
Yeah. And you mentioned that this was a culmination, this diagnosis, your stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, was a culmination of many things over the course of your life, even maybe going back to childhood. Can you explain that a little bit? Because, you know, many people that get a cancer diagnosis, it's like, oh my gosh, I got cancer. There's nothing I can do about it. You know, this is random. And I think you and I, because of the training we've had, we know it's not that random, but it's also very complicated in terms of how it all, you know, goes down. So give us a little sense of that. What do you think? We know glyphosate is a factor you think was at
Sure.
play. What else do you think was at play for you in this diagnosis?
Honestly, I thought about this and this kind of dawned on me recently. And it was brought to my attention that my mother, when she came over to this country from India, she was carrying me and she was with my dad, and they basically had me 3 months after they came to this country. The 3 months before I was born, my mom wasn't eating very well. She was very homesick and she was having a lot of trauma. And and my mom actually lost a lot of weight. And when I came out, I was an inconsolable infant. And I believe that I was experiencing trauma in utero.
Wow.
And so I believe that when I came out, I was in fight or flight. And this kind of stayed with me for the rest of my life until, you know, recently. And the trauma that I experienced and the being in fight or flight was just is obviously, as we know, puts us into a state of stress, physiological stress that impairs our health in multiple ways. And I feel that that was a contributing factor. And you put everything else together with the glyphosate exposure, the stress at work, the sleepless nights, boom! It was a perfect recipe and perfect storm for me getting lymphoma.
So were you, okay, so let's wind back to that. That's really important and it's different, right? Like most people say, it was my diet, it was my stress, but you're taking this all the way back to being in utero. I find that whole concept really fascinating. You know, one of my TED Talks was on how a lot of these emotions are in our DNA, they're in our mitochondria, and it's like we have to consciously work to reprogram it and change them. Were you conscious of this trauma? Were you conscious of being in fight or flight as a child, as an adolescent, as a med student? Were you aware of any of this?
I was never really aware that I was in a stage of fight or flight. For me, it was a normal way of living. It was the norm for me. You know, being under a lot of pressure from home, my parents putting a lot of pressure with me to do well in school, put the pressure that I put in myself. I was always on edge. And when I really thought about it more and more, it made me think about what I was experiencing when I came out. And the first few months, my mom could never console me. And so I didn't have that bond with my mother. And so it really demonstrated to me that I was constantly in some sort of fight or flight. And these epigenetic changes that occurred in utero really influenced my life after I was born. And I never really got out of that. I mean, and so a lot of the pressures that were put into me really was a way that it fostered those epigenetic changes that were when I was experiencing in utero. So I never really got out of that. And yeah, I think that's what was a big contributing factor.
Wow. So for anybody out there who might be pregnant or thinking about starting a family, I think this is such an important insight. And it's actually, while it's novel to us, in Chinese medicine, they very much believe that they called it the Wei Qi of the mom, the Ren, the connection between different meridians, and how in utero at conception, that energy was determined, and then the child would grow and conceive and then come out with whatever sort of predetermined issues that had happened in utero based on the health of the mother. So this was a very old Chinese medicine concept. Preconception is something that we're just starting to understand in the Western world, but something very much that older systems of medicine really, really harped upon and wanted the mother to be emotionally healthy, physically healthy, nutritionally healthy before conceiving. So I find that so interesting. Now, what for you, as you know, in your journey as a patient, you know, obviously understanding this concept, understanding where your fight or flight may have played in. I always say many diseases are a series of hits, usually a minimum of 3, sometimes up to 5 different hits. Understanding that you continue to take hits throughout your life and your career, where has that shifted you today? Where are you today? What are you practicing? What do you believe in? And what's your advice to somebody out there who might be in the middle of a health battle and not really sure what to do next?
Right. And that's why I feel it's all about a balance. And that's what I write my book. It's about a balance of mind, body, and spirit. And I had the body part down. It was not until I started to really write my book that I actually do a lot of research and determined that I was out of sync with mind and spirit. So now the mind is a huge focus. And the way that I actually focus on that is really practice mindfulness exercises. And, mindfulness, as you know, is really being more in the moment and having moment to moment awareness. And meditation and those really types of things really put me more in the moment and really shift myself more into a parasympathetic and away from fight or flight. And meditation is one aspect. I do yoga because that's a mind body technique that's actually categorized under mindfulness, and things like that I really do. One of the other things that I actually also really understood about myself was that my spiritual self was also lacking. And the way it was lacking was because even though I grew up in a religious household, I didn't have any spirituality. And for me, spirituality was, I didn't understand what it meant because it hit home and I started understanding that I was alone. And I was around people a lot, but I felt awfully alone and I didn't have any connection. I researched a fact that stated that loneliness is a huge mortality. It's more so of a mortality and as a risk factor for mortality, more so than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, more so than drinking alcohol on a regular basis, and more so than obesity. And when I determined that, to me, it dawned on me. I'm like, wow, I was extremely alone, even though I was around people. I just didn't find connection with anyone. And when I learned that it was a huge risk factor for mortality, it made me realize that I needed to find connection. I needed to find a tribe. And since I moved back to the DC area, I found a tribe. I found more people that I could connect with. And that combined with eating correctly, exercising, and practicing mindfulness, to me has really been the true trio to really help balance my lifestyle.
Wow. And, so many of our healers say you won't heal unless you're in a place where you're calm and focused and present and mindful. Otherwise, the stress hormones get out of control. One thing that I find fascinating is spirituality is something that, how do you know that you're not connected to spirit? There are people that have grown up in religious traditions, and so they have rituals and routines that bring them comfort. They have had a sense of spirit maybe growing up, but there are others who have never had that and they don't know how to foster that relationship. Where would you tell somebody to start? I meet people like you all the time who are just a little bit disconnected. They're lost. They don't know how to reestablish that connection to spirit and that sense of loneliness. I feel alone. I feel discouraged, kind of is pervasive. How would you advise them, to start, or how would you advise me, even if I'm talking to them, like, how do I lead people on that path of spirituality when they themselves are struggling and you don't want to ring a religious bell or any of those type of things? You really just more want them connected to spirit.
It's a really good question. And what I've found through research is that the key to unlocking loneliness and to really treat loneliness is through service. So if you're of service to others, it really gets you out of that loneliness mentality. It also fosters connection, and it fosters this sense of community, that you belong and that you're actually giving to others, and that enhances spirituality and the spiritual well-being. So that's what I've been doing more of. In the past, when I was younger, it was all about making as much money as I possibly could, attaining power, notoriety. Now it's more really about connection and being of service to others. And I think that's how you can break out that loneliness cycle.
So powerful, such great information. What is your, we're almost out of time here and there's so much more that we could have talked about, but What's your advice to folks out there? Where would you tell them to start? You know, they may have a cancer diagnosis. You've been a doctor, you've been a patient, you're both. Where should they start? What would you advise them to do? And then if they do want to connect with you and learn more from you, what's the best way for them to go about that?
Yeah, the three things I would advocate doing is really change your diet, eliminate processed foods and sugary beverages, really put yourself into some sort of meditative practice, whether it's breathing exercises or some sort of mind-body exercise like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. And thirdly is really about finding connection. And we're all lonely, and we're all, especially during this era, you know, we're not with social distancing. We really want to foster relationships, and we can do that by picking up on the phone and spending 5 to 10 minutes with someone that we love. So those are my 3 important strategies. And you can find more information about me through my website, from doctortopatient.com. I also have a podcast series that's also called From Doctor to Patient. And you can also find my book on Amazon, which is, of course, called From Doctor to Patient, Healing Cancer Through Mind, Body, and Spirit.
Fascinating journey, fascinating information. I got to ask one more question before I let you go, because I just saw it in my notes here. Psychedelics, you've tried that world, you've been in that world. What do you think? We might have to do a separate show just on that, but tell me what you're thinking there.
Yeah, psychedelics actually kind of opened up my spiritual mentality. It allowed me to understand that we're all connected. It gave me the sense of purpose that I needed to find. And that it's a bigger picture out there. There's a universe that we actually are connected to. Once I made that realization through psychedelics, a lot of things started to click for me.
And by psychedelics, you're referring to mushrooms, or what in particular?
Yeah, specifically, my journeys have been typically with psilocybin, which is the active ingredient with magic mushrooms.
Yeah. Fascinating. We're going to have to talk more about that. More and more people are talking about mushrooms and their power and how it helps you with identifying your spirituality. But such an interesting journey. I'm glad you're healthy and well and safe, and keep up all the good work and keep us all motivated in the world of spirituality and mindfulness as it comes to healing, especially in these chronic diseases, because that is the epidemic really of the future, is dealing with all of this stuff and helping people to understand how it fits together and how to get themselves out of that. So thank you. For everybody else, thank you for watching this episode of Superwoman Wellness. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate and review it and share it with your friends. We're on Spotify, by the way, as well. And I will see you guys next time.